Hello, welcome to Deeper Than Dogmas. This week we will be talking about sex and religion. Now, one of the things that we like to do on the show here is we'll take suggestions from people that watch a show on different topics that we could discuss. This one tonight was just by Befuddled, which is why she joins us tonight, and we're going to be talking about how religion affects sexual expression, or sex itself. I think that one of the things when we're discussing sex and religion is I think that some people don't realize exactly how religion can affect sex. In fact, when I put out the message for the show this week, I had one of the people comment on it. Basically, when I was asking the question, how does sex affect, or how does religion affect sex? The response was, it doesn't affect it at all. When I brought up things like premarital sex or homosexuality or abstinence programs in school, masturbation, these issues here, the response from them was that sure, yeah, it affects that, but people don't listen. That the majority of the human race are fornicators and lusters. That we're naturally going to transgress against God because of our fallen nature. And I think that this was the point exactly that I wanted to address with this, was this idea that even starting off right from the gate, that talking about sex gets linked to these ideas like that being a fornicator or somebody that lusts is a negative characteristic of a person, is probably one of the reasons why there's these negative connotations when you talk about sex in relation to religion. But because this is one of the topics that Befuddled wanted to bring up here, I'm going to turn over to her to start off with what do you have in mind for this topic tonight?
Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for letting me come on. It's my first time. My name is Kylie, by the way, so you guys can call me B or you can call me Kylie, whatever, that works. Actually, when I got a hold of Sokka to suggest this topic, it's because I'm doing a blog post for something, and I have been kind of researching a little bit of the information that's out there about the abstinence-only programs that are not just used in religious settings, but also in the U.S. in school settings sometimes. But for the most part, I was just looking at from the religious standpoint. And I have a personal interest in it. I grew up religious, and I was a Christian for 30-something years, and it was a non-denominational church, but my youth group was very much involved in the whole True Love Awaits push that was, I guess, part of the generation that I was in, and we did the abstinence only, the pledges, and I had a purity ring, or a chastity ring, purity ring, whatever you call them. We didn't do the purity balls. Luckily, those weren't around at the point that I was a kid, but we had the whole big ceremony, I guess, when you all go, and then you've got all 100 kids going up and pledging to not have sex until they get married, and it was just, for me, I totally bought into it, and I thought, not having sex until you get married is basically, as a teenager, was the one way that you could prove to God that you really loved Him. It was kind of like, that's how I saw it, and that would be the worst thing you could do, would be to not be a virgin when you got married. So now that I'm in my 30s and I'm kind of looking back at the way that I think, I'm kind of realizing, I think a lot of the aspects of my own sexuality and sexual expression that I think were affected by the messages that I got growing up in religion. And so I kind of wanted to do some research on it, not just be pulling out from my own experience. But the website that I was looking at is, I don't know how to say it, SIECUS, SIECUS. It's the Sexuality, Information, and Education Council of the United States. They actually have a lot of really good information on there. So that's where, if anyone wanted to look up the stats that I'm talking about, that's where it came from. But they have a whole section that's about these abstinence-only programs, and that talk about what they're used for, what situations that they're used in. And then the stuff that was really interesting to me was some of the research about, on the actual numbers of, okay, do these, take out the morality and the whole God says not to do it, do these programs actually prevent teenagers from having sex? And from basically, from what this research says, it really is not having an effect at all. So, I mean, I was just going to read a couple of the stats off, and you can check them out for yourself if you want to look for it on the website. But it says in April 2007, a federally funded evaluation of the Title V abstinence-only until marriage programs was released. The study, conducted by Mathematica Policy Research Incorporated on behalf of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, found that abstinence-only until marriage programs are ineffective. Of the more than 700 federally funded abstinence-only marriage programs, the evaluation looked at only 4 programs. These programs were handpicked to show positive results, and they still failed. And so some of the more specific stats says that the evaluation found no evidence that abstinence-only programs increased rates of sexual abstinence, which is basically the entire purpose of the program, is to increase abstinence. It said students in the abstinence-only until marriage programs had a similar age of first sex and similar numbers of sexual partners as their peers who were not in the programs. The average age of sexual debut was the same for abstinence-only until marriage participants and control groups. It was 14 years, 9 months. Wait, there's a couple other ones that I was looking at here. Oh, this one I found really interesting. It said that another finding that they had was that the same study found that young people who took a pledge were 1/3 less likely to use contraception when they did become sexually active, and that pledgers had the same rate of STDs as their peers who had not pledged, and that pledgers were more likely to have engaged in both oral and anal sex than their non-pledging peers. So, I mean, that's just some of the statistics and there's quite a bit more. There's couple pages more of statistics that they found when they were evaluating these programs. So I just thought it was really interesting in that, not even coming at it from the moral argument about whether if is sex really this bond between people and all that, but just the fact that these programs that are pushed largely by religious community, they don't even work. They don't affect the amount that kids are having sex at, and in some of the statistics it looks like it's actually harming kids, because it is not preparing them for what it looks like they're going to do regardless of this teaching that they're getting, and like when they're not using protection and stuff like that. So I thought it was just an interesting place to have a discussion about. Yeah, so that's all I had to say about that, at least right now. So if someone else wants to chime in.
Someone said something about anal sex.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. Now I can't think about anything else. Stupid, dirty mind. I'm 23 years old and I still think like a teenager. Other men in this hangout, how long does that last?
Well, I mean, it all depends.
Anal sex?
That's what I was going to ask. Anal sex?
No, I mean, just...
That depends on your partner, I guess, and you, and the chemistry, and the mood, and the candlelight, and how much wine you've had.
Anal sex by candlelight? That's weird. That's really weird.
I meant in terms of having a dirty mind. How long does having a dirty mind last?
A while.
It lasts forever. Your ability to control your impulses, to say the things that you're thinking, hopefully gets mediated with age.
Well, you know what's interesting though? You said you asked guys. I think that's kind of an underlying, not to pick on you, but I think that's kind of an underlying, almost a religious kind of notion too. That it would be that only guys would have, that would be a guy thing to think dirty.
It's just that they share my same bias.
Right. Well, I guess I'm not picking on you. I'm just pointing out another thing that I think.
I'll happily I'll pick up that point of you picking on Epi. So yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. It's a very Victorian notion, and Victorian notions are kind of very steeped in post-agriculture, religious property, women as property, sex being bad in all forms, sexuality and lust being bad in all forms. And, we do have a kind of built into the fabric sensibility that men are supposed to be horny and women aren't. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at.
Yeah, basically, yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Well, actually, if I just might ask something with regards to that, is there also any truth to the women mature faster than men kind of thing? Because I was also thinking of that as I was saying it.
I think
it depends on what you mean by mature.
Yeah, I think in some
socially or physically.
Physically, they certainly do.
Yeah.
Physically they do, but most studies show that women need to enter their sexual prime later in life than most males do.
It's like
I
in
see.
the 30s, I think.
Okay, well, I learned something.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But you know what? Going on, actually, one of the points that Chris brought up there too was the idea, the Victorian sense of like lustful, like behavior and such. Is that you actually see this in bring this back to the whole religion and sex thing, is that even in verses where they talk about if a man lusts after a woman in his heart, or if a man lusts after a woman, he has already committed adultery in his heart. Now I paraphrase, I'm obviously not getting the exact scripture right there, but even in that notion there, there's no mention of woman, woman lust or anything. It's still purely a a male characteristic to lust after something, but even there. The idea that it puts out is, and this kind of goes us back onto the topic of religion and sexuality, is the act of lusting, the act of looking at a woman and desiring her in such a way is considered taboo. It's considered could be considered a sin, and that's the way that it's interpreted by some people. That not just the act of engaging in some kind of fornication could be considered sinful, but just the thought of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what kind of negative spin does this put on people that are trying to explore their sexuality? Is trying to explore sexuality a good thing, or is it something that is shunned by the church? If Maximus or Vecca want to maybe chime in on that.
I actually would like to chime in on that because the word lust is usually improperly understood when translated. It's not that the translation is wrong, it's correct, but to lust has a connotation that's far greater than just thinking about something. In fact, the Helps word study says it's to properly staying, it's to show focus or passion as it aptly builds on. That's where the Greek word for it comes from, epi, what a person truly yearns for, to greatly desire to do or to have something, to long for, to desire very much. The only reason why we kind of have this notion that any thought of sex is just grounds for sin of itself, I think is more closely related to Lutheran theology. Luther thought that pretty much whatever you do throughout the day is kind of sinful. It's not, in fact, even when it's subconscious in a sense, it's still a form of sin. Concupiscence is, I think, the Latin word for it, but really it's just like a focused, really the kind of desire I kind of find in that is kind of a strong yearning. It's more of an unhealthy obsession, if you will, which I think everyone can agree is not something one would want to have or focus on.
So we should consider our sex drive to be like sinful and part of our fallen state, simply having a strong sex drive?
Simply. Well, having a sex drive is not wrong in and of itself. It's just there is a proper and an improper use for it.
If you wanted to add something to that as well there.
Yeah, I did. As far as the thinking lustful thoughts toward another woman or what have you, I think that it's probably fairly common. I'm not going to say that everyone does it, but I do think it's probably fairly common. Even those in relationships, in marriages, tend to fantasize about other people and things like that. And so this is a common human natural thing for humans to do, and it's just basically making them feel shameful and guilty. Sorry about my son. Making them feel this shame and guilt for something that naturally occurs. And also I wanted to touch on even the concept of Christ having to be born of a virgin because he has to be born pure and without sin. That alone suggests that sexual relations is sinful and degrading.
It didn't have to be. I mean, God could have probably made him from the dirt if he wanted to.
Yeah. Well, don't the Catholics believe that Mary's hymen actually got restored?
That's a later innovation. But in terms of the necessity of the virgin birth, that's just usually cited in terms of prophecy. Not necessarily anything in and of itself being wrong. And before Floyd starts putting out the "it just means young women" thing, I know there's a lot of dispute about that, but from the early Christian point of view, that's how it originated. Even if you want to say that Isaiah just says a young woman, the early church understood that to be, through Greek translation, a notion of a virgin bringing a sign of prophecy.
Hey, Maximus.
Even if,
It just says young woman in there.
even if he was
No,
to
thank
just
you, because I didn't address that.
even if he was to suggest that, it's just a fulfillment of prophecy and that's why he came about, well, the prophecy itself is supposedly from this God. So it still alludes to this concept that sexuality is sinful, and thus the reason why Christ needed to be born that way.
I totally disagree with that. Totally disagree with that.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second, Maximus. I just want to thank Veckel for joining us as the first time with us on the panel as well today. And I know that you wanted to address something that Eve said as well here. So feel free to jump in, Veckel.
Yeah, I mean, what Eve said is totally subjective. If she wants to come to that conclusion, that's fine. But the Bible does not in any way, shape, or form teach that sexuality is wrong or immoral. It's talking about the way it's performed. That is what is spoken of or spoken against. And we can clearly see that throughout several parts of the Old Testament, of course. Bestiality, homosexuality, stuff like that. But sex in general, I mean, the Bible, no, I mean the virgin birth, no, that by itself does not speak against sex at all.
Well, you brought up a couple. Sorry, 1 second. You brought up a couple points there, Veckel, with the bestiality and homosexuality.
Yeah, we see no Old Testament, right?
Yeah, but there's also other people that would go as far to say, they'll talk about things about, like I said, impure thoughts, premarital sex, masturbation, these other things that are considered very natural to any type of sexual, I guess, exploration of anybody. And what do you feel about those? Do you feel that the Bible also condones some of that behavior?
Well, as far as masturbation, that's debatable. We don't see anything specifically God condemning masturbation.
We should have a debate about that and call it the master debate.
What was the other thing you mentioned, Saka, though?
Premarital sex.
Premarital sex, yeah, there's definitely a mention of there's no blatant mention of it. However, we as Christians come to an inference that premarital sex is a sin based on what we see in verses we see in the Old and the New Testament.
Great. Maybe we can elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Well, can I?
Right now? Oh.
Sure. Well, B, you wanted to add something there?
Well, I was just going to say, in the tradition that I grew up in, it was kind of similar to what Veckel is saying, is that it wasn't ever explicitly said that masturbation is wrong, and I know that there's some traditions that, yeah, they will say absolutely it's a sin, but the way that it was explained to us was that it's not a sin as long as you're not lusting after somebody when you're doing it, or you're not thinking impure thoughts, which I'm thinking, how many people masturbate and don't think about anything? I don't know how that works, but apparently that was the way to kind of get out of it, is that if you weren't lusting or thinking impure thoughts, then it wasn't a sin technically. So
personally, I would just look at a mirror of myself, because that's all I really need.
So creepy. So creepy.
I'm not touching that one.
I want to address what Chris. I want to address what Chris said. He says here, isn't there something about unnecessary spilling of the seed? And that's a reference to the Old Testament of Onan. Again, the crime that he committed was not masturbation. The crime he committed was simply a direct disobedient action that God told him to do. Or, well, not the disobedient action, but God commanded him to go into Onan's Onan's brother's wife, because his brother had died, so in order to pass on the line. But he just wanted to just to get the na, and that's it. But he didn't drop the seed in her. So he copulated on the floor, and that is why he got in trouble. Not because he was masturbating, because he didn't masturbate. He went in onto her, but then he pulled out and he ejaculated on the floor.
And so I think that, well, at least maybe in Catholicism, or maybe not in Catholicism in general, but in the way that Roman Catholicism was taught up in Jersey when I was growing up, that very story was kind of used as a metaphor for that's why That's why you shouldn't pull out. That's why you shouldn't waste seed. And if you're going to waste seed, that's the whole, that's what happens when you masturbate. So that's why you shouldn't masturbate. That was kind of, even though I don't remember that specific story, and I'm very happy that you brought it up because I always wondered about it.
I was
Which is
thinking
why I put it in
I
the
could
chat.
kind of address that. I could kind of address.
Real quick, by the way, I'm not afraid to say vagina, okay?
good.
Well,
I love the fact that you said
Vagina from the South, say Virginia.
I think the other word was dirtier, probably.
All right, so all right, maybe I can
This
address it
reminds
because
me
you
of
brought it
Demonic
up.
Python. Demonic
I
Python.
was hoping you'd call it a yoni after a bit. It was,
Oh.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Max.
Maybe can I just bring up
Yeah,
the story
go ahead,
of
Max.
Onan for a second, or respond to your point? The story of Onan is pretty interesting, and I, for the longest time, also thought about it in that sense that Onan was punished for doing the no-no or spilling the seed. And if you look in the story, there's a huge context that comes from what happens if a wife doesn't have her husband's son, even if it's through his brother, like in a Levitical marriage. In that case, she wouldn't have had any access to the dowry or anything of her husband's because the family could just disown her. And what's more is the Onan would have had much more of his brother's stuff afterwards. But in terms of the Catholic Church and what the Catholic Church teaches, that's usually defended from a point of what's called natural theology, or looking at nature and devising what is natural and what is unnatural. And just to further bring out some definitions, natural, as the Catholic Church uses it, or as natural theologians use it, doesn't mean man-made or not man-made. So, for example, a pair of scissors is artificial, but it's not unnatural in the Catholic Church sense. It's unnatural in the sense that nature doesn't produce it. Like, you don't see scissors growing on trees.
Can I talk about scissors and sex next to each other? Ugh, it just sounds
Ew.
uncomfortable.
Well,
I'm kidding.
well,
I know.
scissoring is an action performed by lesbians, so it's not really.
Just for those of you guys who don't know that.
Can I say something here? I wanted to say that, every believer tends to think that they have the right interpretation, and so when I hear people that try to defend their viewpoint of sexuality based on their interpretation of Scripture, it does not negate. Sorry, my son seems to get all excited when I start talking. It does not negate that other people see it differently and interpret it differently and get a different reaction or viewpoint of it.
Well, that's
definitely true.
That's a good point, Maximus, or Eve. Sorry,
Eve.
I'll let you respond to that in a second. So maybe we can bring this kind of back towards instead of just looking at the different interpretations that some people might get from Scripture regarding just acts of sex itself. What are some of the things that religion does affect when it comes to our attitudes towards other things? For example, contraceptives is a huge issue going on. I mean, I don't think that there's a lot of denominations of Christianity that view birth control or contraceptions in a positive light. Now, that stuff is based purely on from interpretations of religious texts. So
No, it's not.
well, I mean, okay, maybe you can elaborate on that.
Okay, so usually the biggest organization that's usually against contraception is again the Catholic Church, and what I was discussing was Catholic natural theology. Catholics don't get their views on sex merely from opening the Bible and finding scriptures that confirm their position. Rather, natural theology is the practice of looking at creation itself and having that as being revelation for what's right and wrong. And the Catholic Church uses the metaphysical system of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle thought that nature is something that produces things, and each thing has a purpose in and of itself. It's not, purposes aren't extrinsic. Like when we think of a rock having a purpose, we usually think of, oh, I'll put it as a doorstop or use it to hold down my papers. Whereas Aristotle thought that everything has its own intrinsic purpose, something that has a purpose in and of the role it plays within nature. So, for example, I have hands and legs. The purpose of legs is to walk. The purpose of hands is to grab stuff. Or, for example, I might find that animals have the same appendages and they use them in similar fashions. The point is, everything has what's known as a final cause, or a telos, or an end, and that proper function or end is the proper way to use something, and anytime something frustrates that end, then it's considered to be anathema or contrary to the end of that thing. So humans are rational animals. We act to the end of being rational creatures, but at the same time, we also, as rational creatures, have to acknowledge the ends of the parts of our bodies and use them in a proper accord. Because things like contraception, things like bestiality, same-sex acts, incest, well, not incest, but all these ones specifically, frustrate the natural end of the body. Masturbation, because the end of the genitalia is to reproduce. Anything that kind of frustrates that end is seen as being contrary to the Catholic theology of the body.
Okay, so maybe even if it doesn't have the scriptural support behind it, the idea of contraceptives, for example, is still a construct purely of religious nature in that sense. Do you think that it's beneficial for religion to be guiding people in things like sexuality?
Well, it's sexuality in general, or are you just using contraception as just a particular example? We could talk about same-sex marriage in general, for example.
Well, I mean, anybody actually on that is that should religion have any say in sexuality at all? I'm sure that there'll probably be different views between the theists and atheists on this panel, but what do people think?
So I think everybody.
Sorry, let's. I'm going to start with Mr. Mott first.
It's fucking Maori.
Oh, sorry.
So, and that's an inside joke, by the way. So I can say that it might not be the case. Let's see. It might not be the fault or cause of religion for this, but I will say that, being raised Roman Catholic several generations from an Italian American family, there was an understanding of abiding by the Catholic Church's ideas of contraception that led to some weird events. For instance, my mother is the second oldest of 9 children. My mother was pregnant with my eldest brother at the same time that her mother was pregnant with my youngest aunt. Right? So now that's just like, I'm sure that that's just something that happens frequently in large families and groups of large families and stuff. But since I'm kind of on the cusp of, generations where families were a lot smaller, that was a frustration. I remember my mom telling stories about, like, every time her mom would get pregnant after the 4th or 5th child, and keep in mind there was 1 miscarriage, so even though there were 9 children, there were 10 pregnancies, my mom would look at her mom, my grandmother, and be like, what are you doing? Right? But, they were abiding by the church and, didn't even bother with the rhythm method, no contraception, no vasectomies or tubal ligation. I mean, it's just, so being raised in a certain religious culture bred a certain mentality that kind of led, like now my brother is older than my youngest aunt. And that's fine and well, but my cousins come in waves, for crying out loud. Never mind my nephews and nieces. So that's my only contribution. I think that, and that is a weird dynamic, I have to admit.
Okay. B, you wanted to add something in there, and I think, Beckel, you wanted to go after that?
Yeah, I was just, the question about if religion should play a role in sexuality, I think obviously that the answer to that is going to be if your religion says it needs to play a role, then obviously you would think it does. But I guess coming from my perspective, I just see, even just coming from personal experience, I see a lot of the negative effects and some of the stuff I talked about earlier, of the abstinence-only thing and pushing that on kids, as to that's the only, in a way that you're not, that religious parents don't give their kids any information other than you don't have sex because God says it's wrong. And I know a lot of Christian parents don't do that, and I'm glad that they do, that there is a lot of them that do give information, but there is a lot that don't. I mean, basically my sex ed was done through youth group, which said you don't have sex because God says it's wrong. So there wasn't any information really given that would prepare you for when you get into a situation And I think that is kind of reflected in the statistics, the stuff I was talking about earlier about how kids that take these pledges are less likely to use protection the first time that they have sex, because it's like this denial thing of like, I'm not going to do it because I've taken this pledge, and then their parents are in denial as well because my kids will never do it, and it's seen as like if we give them access to birth control, that's like telling them that it's okay to do it. So they won't even do that step. And so there was quite a few kids just in my youth group alone that ended up getting pregnant and having sex 1 or 2 times because they were not prepared, period. And then that's not to even address all the guilt and shame that goes into the whole thing. I think it does a disservice to kids to not give them the information that they need to make these decisions. Even if they're not going to agree with you, at least you've given them all the information. So that was what I was going to say about it.
Okay, Floyd, you wanted to add something in as well there.
Yeah, I think these abstinence-only programs just makes sex more of a forbidden fruit for these teenagers. It makes it more enticing because people will want more with what they can't have, right? So it seems I think that's what happens. They say, oh well. The more you forbid it, the more they're going to want it. So it becomes more of a forbidden fruit. As far as the verse, I think it's actually Matthew. It's in Matthew 5 about where Jesus says, if you just lust, if you look at a woman lustfully, you've already committed adultery in your heart. Again, I think that puts more. More guilt and more pressure that's unneeded. I think it's a very natural thing. I remember in my early 20s, I was actually playing football at a high school football field with a church group. And I remember a lady came on the track, and she started running, exercising, running up and down the bleacher steps, and she was wearing these very tight spandex leggings.
Paint us a picture, Floyd. Paint us a picture.
Yeah, and she had a very very attractive rear end, and being in my early 20s, it caught my attention, and my eyes bugged out staring at her. And I looked around at the other guys, and I noticed my brother was checking her out, and a few other guys were checking out, but there were 2 Christian ministers with us. So I said, oh, well, let me look at them, because everyone was just, all the guys were fixated by this woman in her tight spandex. So I looked over at the Christian ministers, and they were just focused, just looking away, refusing to move their necks at all. And I could just tell that they were just resisting temptation. And I was thinking, boy, what a difficult life you live if you can't even look. It's like it's like you can look. There's a saying you can read the menu even though you're not going to eat off of it. But I guess they think you can't even read the menu.
Hey, I say when it comes to enjoying God's creation, don't hate, appreciate.
Well,
Sorry, Eve, you wanted to add something in here, and then I'm gonna take it back to I'm gonna bring it back to the abstinence programs here in a second.
okay, it's just that Floyd says something that I'm in agreement with. The whole forbidden, it's forbidden and it makes it more enticing. I agree with that. I think that it does, and I been looking up a little bit about how sexual suppression could actually lead to sexual addiction, if there's even a thing considered sexual addiction. But it leads to teens or those who are curious wanting to be more and more and being more and more active. And I think that is something that actually occurred to me as a teen as well, from being told that I couldn't do it. It was more of a forbidden thing that was enticing to me. And once it did happen, then it was like, well, I'm not worthy anymore anyway. I done screwed up. And all the guilt and shame with my teenage years was full of guilt and shame because of that.
Benny, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to tag on with what Floyd and Eve were saying, is that there's this impossible standard, the standard of not even being able to think lustful thoughts, to this thought control, the mind policing, is it's impossible. And I mean, I've known people who've worked in the ministry as pastors, and sometimes if they're honest, they'll tell you like they can't actually do it. I mean, all it does is it makes them hide their true selves. It makes them hide from their congregations and their friends and their family what they're actually like. And it's why I believe why these sex scandals come out, where you have these pastors with these secret lives, because they can't actually, they're so repressed. The religious morality is so repressive that it creates a standard no one can actually live up to. It's pretty much the only thing.
Isn't that a bit, although without any hard and fast statistics, isn't this kind of what's the term here? The kind of evidence that you only find in certain, very confined anecdotal evidence. That's the word.
Well,
Isn't that kind of very anecdotal?
It fits my anecdote perfectly. I've said this before. Being raised Catholic, the notion that as a late teenager, 16, 17. Let's see, I graduated high school when I was 17, and in junior and senior year, so that's 15 through 17, I reread the Bible, and it blew my mind that having lustful thoughts meant that I was having lust in my heart, and as a teenager that lusted after almost every movable object, that blew my mind. I perpetually was shaming myself internally until finally I was like, fuck this.
Yeah. I want to add something about it.
Go ahead, B, and then Becco, I know he's been chomping at the bit to answer as well.
Well, I think what Eve started out talking about the sex addiction thing, and there's a book by Daryl Ray. It talks about it. It's called Sex and God, and it talks quite a bit about it. But one of the points that he makes, I mean, I don't agree with everything he says in the book, but one of the points that he makes is that as a psychologist, that he would have people come to him and talk about being addicted to sex, addicted to porn, and he would ask. I mean, and he said inevitably most of these people ended up they were Christian people that came to him telling him this, and he would ask them, okay, so what does it look like to be addicted to pornography? Does that mean that you're looking at it once a week, twice a week, And so he said that he would have this huge range of responses. And some people would be, once a week means I'm an addict, or masturbating twice a week means I'm a hopeless addict. Well, most of these people are getting these ideas from religion that is telling them that they are addicted. So it's like this whole sex addiction, porn addiction thing is in his mind at least something that is perpetuated by religious thinking, because it's another way to hook and guilt people for doing stuff that he said there's no normal range, or there's no normal standard that says if you masturbate more than 3 times a week you're an addict, or you're not normal. Nobody's ever figured out what's normal, so how can you say that I'm an addict? So that was just
you're an addict if it starts actually being a detriment on your life.
Right, but why is the reason that they feel it's a detriment in their life is because the church is telling them that they're bad for doing it. So if you would take out that message, and if it really is not okay, now somebody who can't stop and has to stop every 15 minutes and go masturbate, okay, maybe there's something else going on. But I'm talking about most of these people the reason they were so distressed about it was because of the messages that they've gotten that it's bad. So that was the point.
Becca, I know there's probably quite a bit that you want to kind of weigh in on here now. So feel free to jump in and kind of address any of the points that have come up here.
Yeah, there's so much said that I could respond to, but I don't want to hijack the hangout. Again, what we're hearing from a lot of you is we're hearing the naturalist perspective of it, and we're hearing a lot of subjectivism as well, that this causes this to occur. First of all, the Bible does not deny that having sexual desires is natural. It is natural. The Bible talks about that. We even assert that God created sex, not so that we can just reproduce, but also so we can enjoy while reproducing. So the Bible in no way, shape, or form condemns sexual behavior. The only thing that is condemned is sex outside of the confines of marriage and sex with anything other than the opposite sex.
Well, I think that's part of the problem.
No, it's not part.
The sex,
But
the
that's
sexual, the
but
sex.
that wait, hold on. But that what you're saying to me though, Eve, is very subjective though. Again, to say that these things cause people to be addicted to sex even more, that again, that's also subjective
It's not.
because.
It's not subjective when B just read stats earlier.
But you're reading a very
If I can finish, Beckel.
Well, I wasn't done yet though.
Sorry, one second. Let me just sort of try to bring this under control here for a second. I think one of the things is that regardless of what your feelings are towards the matter at hand,
Mm-hmm.
the thing is that the way that religion and in some sects of Christianity, mainly we're talking about here. I mean, I know that this affects other religions out there as well, but I don't think we have any subject matter experts on Islam or anything right now. But just within some sects of Christianity itself, is that the way that we approach sex is with kind of a very negative attitude. Now,
Not really.
Well, hold on a second.
Yes, again, you have.
Let me finish my point here, and then I'll let. One second. What I'm saying is that the sex before marriage thing. Now, I have a son. I don't have a daughter, but I mean, if I had a daughter, I could definitely see myself, hoping that she wouldn't be running around, having sex with everything, just because of the risk involved there. Now, that's just my own personal choice. You can call that subjective, that's fine. I mean, that kind of falls within what somebody would call maybe Christian morals when it does approach the issue of sexuality. But in the sense that some of the articles that that B has said earlier and that we talked about, where when within religion, when they approach sexuality as a very negative thing, that they don't even want to teach it in schools, for example, that what kind of effect does that have on religious and non-religious people alike? And one of the things that you can find on the internet, and one of the things that B has shown through these articles here, is that when you start approaching sex with a very kind of negative view, when you start talking about abstinence-only programs, they're shown not to work. And so regardless of what your view on sexuality and the act of having sex is itself, should we really be approaching with it with such a negative attitude that we don't even want to talk about it, that it's taboo to even bring it up?
If I just might throw something in there, there's two.
But go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, Max, throw in something here, and then Beckel, I'll bring it back to you to respond.
Okay, so in terms of this discussion, I think there are two different topics being thrown around under the same umbrella as the same topic. On one hand, we have the notion of what constitutes proper sex that we should all agree is the case, like the ethics of sex, which is an interesting topic in its own right. But on the other hand, we have what is the best way to educate and attitude to give future people on what sex is, which is something else. And I think we all, even though we disagree in terms of our sexual ethics, I think we all might have an agreement in terms of the notion of how to teach kids and give them the proper attitude. I basically think that the best way to teach kids about sex and in terms of raising them is not necessarily through just relying on the school. I think that, yes, abstinence programs are a failure. I'm going to say that right now. It's the case.
I agree with that.
Yeah. The reason why abstinence programs are a failure, in my opinion, is because they don't tell kids why sex is best saved before marriage. They just say, oh, it's about your purity, and they use all these kind of flowery languages about how marital sex is just better. And, of course, that's not really the case. I mean, there's a religious... I mean, the problem is the students don't realize that there is usually a religious undertone in how the parents might view sex.
Can I ask you a question real quick about the thing you said?
I just want to finish that thought.
Yeah.
I really think the best attitude to give my kids, as I want them, is a very skeptical attitude towards sex. And by skeptical, I mean I want to introduce them to various points of view on the topic, and I also want them to make up their own minds, and I also want them to know my position, why I hold my position, and I want them to either accept that or reject it as rational thinking beings. Because I really think that if you honestly think of children in that way at an earlier age, I think that's what we're better going. That's what I think that's going to be a better expectation. Not necessarily.
Okay, I'm going to let Beckel finish. I really want Beckel to get his point out. But Beckel, do you mind if Benny asks one question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good.
I just wanted to say, you talked about the sex being best saved for marriage. But under the circumstances of modern living, that is it's really hard. I mean, people used to get married when they were, when the Bible was written, people got married at 10, 12 years old, 14, 16 years old. Now people going to college and getting married much later. College-educated women are averaging around 30 years old for their first child. So, I mean, if you think you're going to have people waiting until they're 30 to have sex, you're just delusional. You're just lying to yourself. So, I mean, let's just not lie to ourselves about what people are actually capable of, because you're not improving their behavior. You're just forcing them to lie to themselves and their family and their friends. I'm pretty much just repeating what I said earlier.
I'm kind of curious.
Sorry, one second, Max.
Is this contradicting anything I really just said? I said abstinence programs are a failure. I said we shouldn't be doing them, and I said we should just teach kids our own particular positions. And I think we should have sex ed in the schools, but we should also teach our own particular children our views on sex, and we should also teach them to think for themselves and adopt what they think is the proper viewpoint when they grow up. I think that's the best way to go about things.
Right.
And if they decide, yes, it's not for me when they're and they determine college is much better than getting married and being able to have sex, then so be it. And if they want to have sex there, again, so be it. As long as they've made their position and on an intelligent and rational basis. That's all I'm asking for.
Okay.
And I don't think the fact that Ben is talking about it because it does still exist takes anything away from your point. It's awesome that you think the way that you do about it, but that you have to admit that doesn't stop people from introducing it into policy.
Right.
And I think that's what Benny was addressing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. As Christians, somebody mentioned, Christians struggling, pastors and stuff. Of course, we acknowledge this as Christians. I mean, this is an epidemic within the church today. But that doesn't mean that we Christians speak against sex in general and say that it's a sin. I mean, again, this is. I agree with you guys 100% that it is a natural thing. And it is not something that should be withheld. I mean, this is exactly the Christian position that sex is a natural thing, and it should be performed. But of course, where we disagree is, where and when it should be performed. Should it be performed outside the confines of marriage, or before marriage, or whatever? That's where that seems to be the only time we disagree. But again, and kind of going back to this argument about abstinence causes sexual addiction. I don't know if we can say that is the only case, because again, we do have people that have practiced sex, and it has caused them to become even more sexually addicted to these things. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like we're coming with a very biased understanding of what the Bible says, and I keep hearing people say, "Oh, because of Christianity, because it kept me from doing this, it kept me from doing that." But I'm seeing a lot of misconstrued understanding of what Christianity teaches regarding sexuality.
I'm gonna actually weigh in on what Beckel said here too.
Can I just respond to what he just said, though? I mean, you can say that what Christianity teaches, but when I'm talking about the experience of what I was taught, that is what I was taught in the church that I was in. So whether that agrees with what you see Christianity as teaching or not is kind of irrelevant, because that is what the church that I grew up in taught.
But again, that's
that's not Christianity as a whole or whatever. But I don't really care.
That's fine.
I think the problem is
the problem is though, again, whenever I hear, even going back to the issue of morality in general, we sometimes hear atheists say, "Oh, look at what these groups of Christians are doing over here. This is why I don't want to be a Christian." Well, I always challenge them. Okay, well, what does Christ say about the whole situation? What does the Bible say about these things?
No, I get what you're saying. I'm not saying that what I grew up with
that's fine, because for all we know, you could have been involved in a cult. For all we know,
but what I'm saying is,
guys, it's a whole separate topic down that road of what the teachings are, and if people are actually teaching the right thing. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to tighten it up.
Yeah, let me kind of bring this in here for a second, because I think what's happening is we're kind of talking past each other on these 2 points. Is that on one point, Beckel's saying that what does the Scripture actually teach, and I agree with him. Is that the scripture itself is we need to understand that there are many different sects of Christianity. So, not every single sect of Christianity views sex completely as a sin. That this is some I'm saying, but there's some that oh my goodness, I screwed up in this word last week too. Demonize it in a certain way that is noticeable.
Let me ask you a question though.
Sure.
These sects of Christianity that demonize sex, in what way are they demonizing it?
Okay, great. Glad you asked. See, when we talk about where they demonize it, what I'm referring is to the attitudes that they approach it, and this is in the sense that they don't even want to bring it up as a topic. That these issues where it's we don't want to talk about it. Abstinence only, no sex, no marriage. They don't want to bring up any aspect of sex at all because they don't even want to talk about it. And could that have detrimental effects on how somebody approaches sex later in life? Entirely possible. But it's not to say that that necessarily Christianity does demonize all sex. I think that there's a possibility that it does approach it in a way that's a little bit different. And this goes back to the question I was asking before, where how much play should religiosity, regardless of whether it's supported by Scripture, we know that there are denominations of religions out there that do have very negative attitudes towards all sex except for church-approved sex. And should we really be, should the church really be setting the standard for what is, I guess you can call, morally acceptable sex?
I think apparently Floyd would like to comment, and also B said she didn't complete her sentence. So, deeper than Dogma, moderator dude, how would you like to address those things?
Sorry, yeah, I know, this is, a lot of people want to kind of weigh in this topic, and we're trying to get to everybody get their 2 cents in here. So I'm going to let B finish what she said earlier, and then Floyd, you can throw in yourself, and then again, Beck or Maximus, or if anybody that wants to respond to anything that's said, can go in at that time if that's okay.
Okay, I wasn't trying to get derailed onto and having a discussion about who's right or wrong on what Christianity says. What I was trying to point out is that if the whole quote unquote true Christianity card is pulled to say well, that's not what Christianity teaches, it just kind of minimizes and denies the fact that this is the experience of a large number of people that grew up in the church. Whether or not you want to say that that's true Christianity or not, it is. And if you need statistics or, you need me to gather the research that shows that how often this is taught, I would think that the fact that abstinence-only programs are a huge push and are partially funded by the government should tell you that this is the way that a lot of the church approaches this. So you can't just say, well, that's just not Christianity in order to negate the point. That was what I was trying to say. So.
And there definitely are some Christian groups that are Christian sects that that view anything outside of marriage as sinful, especially masturbation. I know like the Catholic Church considers masturbation a sin. So does the Jehovah's Witnesses and some evangelicals as well. I remember I actually found a pamphlet from the Jehovah's Witnesses, and in it they said masturbation will lead to other things like homosexuality and rape and things like that. So they strictly forbid masturbation. But Mounty brought up a good point about how people are waiting to the 30s to get married. That is true, but certain Christian communities within the United States are against that sort of lifestyle. They consider that lifestyle to be very selfish and materialistic. There's a show on TLC called 19 Kids and Counting, and it's about this sort of Christian community that's kind of living that sort of lifestyle. They're basically believe that you should get married. You shouldn't wait until you're 30. You should get married early, and women should lead a traditional role of just being a wife and mother. Don't go out and seek a career and so forth. And they have the attitude, oh well, the Lord will provide, and they don't do any contraception or anything. They'll just have children, one after another, like 19 kids and counting. Obviously, this is how many kids, they're having. They're having many, but yeah, there are Christian communities that are basically living this old-fashioned lifestyle where the you should be married, marry young, have a lot of children. Wives should just be a mother to their children and live a very traditional submissive role.
Well, hold on a second. Veckel's bringing up a really good point.
Sorry, Maximus. Sorry, 1 second. Veckel put something in the side chat there for Floyd's response there, that basically says, is that a problem? If a group of people, if it's their culture, if it's their upbringing that the woman is in a submissive role, that wants to sit there and spit out, pop out babies, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, especially,
can I add a little bit to the framing? Can I add a little bit to the framing? Especially in the contemporary culture, a very bougie, liberal, like, I'm going to wait later in life to marry. Maybe I will have a kid, maybe I won't. If I do, it's probably only going to be like a very metrosexual approach to procreating. I at least maybe because I live close to Philadelphia, a metropolitan area. That's a very common attitude. So the idea of, like just spitting out kid after kid after kid after kid after kid is kind of, in today's context, a little weird. And, maybe we want to explore that. But I think Veckel's question is awesome.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, too. Eve, you wanted to add something to that as well, I believe?
Well, I was kind of wanting to talk about the whole, waiting until married and everything. And B, I think you had read some stats earlier that was talking about the kids, those who participate in the abstinence-only programs and those who do not are kind of on the same level in regards to having sexual relations at, before they're married.
Well, you might be thinking this. One of the stats I said was the average age of the first time they had sex was the same for abstinence-only participants and control groups. It was 14 years, 9 months. And then another thing, I didn't say this earlier, but another one that I read said that at most they found that that kids that participated in the abstinence-only pledges, at most it delayed sexual activity by 18 months. That was like the longest that they really saw that it made any difference. So
the reason, I'm sorry, can I just go ahead and...
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, finish your point.
The reason I wanted to know that was because I think that that's kind of really important when it comes to trying to teach kids to wait till they're married. If they're not going to wait, that is how I see that is a problem.
Now, one of the things that came up in this conversation, and one of the reasons why I was interested in doing this week, not just because B suggested this, but because myself and Eve were participating in a thread a couple days ago or yesterday, I can't remember when it was, where these issues of abstinence-only programs came up. That you can take a look at. There's a lot of statistics out there that show that the states in the U.S. that lead to abstinence-only that have abstinence-only programs also are states that have the highest amount of STDs, teen pregnancies, and abortions. So, is there a correlation between abstinence-only programs and the teen pregnancies, all these other issues? Now, one of the things that with the person that we were discussing this with that they brought up is that. Is religiosity the only factor? The second most religious state in the United States is Utah, which actually doesn't have the same problems as most of the other states that have abstinence-only programs. But one of the things that they also pointed out was that the states that do have the highest teen pregnancy rates, STDs, and abortions, are also states that are below the have an average lower income. So, is it fair really to say that abstinence-only programs lead to these behaviors, or does things like poverty levels also factor into it?
I think I believe I've read some reports where in Western Europe, the countries that have the better sex education programs have the lowest teen pregnancies and STDs. For example, I think Holland has the lowest teen pregnancies and STDs. I think the UK has the highest, and there are other countries that have better sex education than us. It kind of seems to match. Again, it's almost like the way the states are going. You know, in the different states where you've got the better the sex education seems to show statistics of the less, lower
Yeah,
percentages.
you know, Sokka. You know, Sokka, what we're talking about. You know, teaching 5- and 6-year-olds about oral and anal
Oh,
sex.
don't go down
Oh my
that
goodness.
bloody route, please.
The-
Yes, I'm that deed, Benny.
I,
Yeah.
I feel like I want to respond to that, but I'm actually probably not going to because I think it's been handled.
Can
But
I point out? Can I make a point of interest? I know we usually measure abstinence-only programs compared to our regular sex education programs, but I'd be curious as to whether or not abstinence programs in Christian schools and private schools work better than the ones in the public school system.
Well, it's good you brought that up because, like I said, Utah, which I mean has a, very strong Mormon demographic, for example. There's a lot more, either homeschoolings or Mormon-oriented schooling there as well. That this different sect of Christianity that does teach abstinence-only programs doesn't run into the same issues that you find in a lot of the Southern evangelical states.
I don't really think we should. I don't really think we should count Utah. I don't really think we should.
Don't teach it at all. They don't even have abstinence only. They just don't teach it.
Oh wow. I would just like to ask something add something in terms of Utah. I don't think we should count Utah because I lived there for some time, and in terms of the porn watching rate, I just ruined that for the whole state. I'm sorry. Of course, that's a joke.
To me, I put on the side there. To me, it's what I call the red button philosophy. If you keep telling a child to not push the red button, what's eventually going to happen? You keep constantly telling them, don't press the red button, don't press the red button, don't press the red button. Eventually, what's going to happen? The child's head is going to be filled with ideas. Okay, what if I push the red button? What will happen? So it's the same thing with these abstinence programs. And if you're constantly telling people or forbidding sex from people, eventually they're going to go out of their way and they're going to want to feel, they're going to want to see for themselves what it feels like. So of course, this is why you see so much failure in some congregations and in the abstinence programs, is because you constantly have this stuff put in your face every day. Okay, I get the point. But now that you're putting it in my face so much, now I'm curious to know what it is that you're trying to keep me from.
Well,
You know what I mean?
I think that can add to the desire, to their curiosity about
Absolutely.
sexuality.
Yeah.
But consider considering B's stats that she brought up, I think that it's going to happen regardless in most cases.
Right.
So here's a question I have for
Bible says.
here's a question I have for Becca and Maximus here, is that should the church, in your opinion, take a more active role in sexual education?
Yes.
Yes.
And not actually, I want to further that. Not only should they take a bigger role in sex education, but they should encourage an environment that makes it much easier. And by that I mean, so in Western culture, because it's very individualistic and very prone to the individual, where the individual is just a part of society, not as just a part of society. I mean, the person is the real entity, and the society is just something that the real person is a part of. It's incidental. However, in other communities, which we'll call collectivistic communities and communitarian ones, you're part of the society. You are basically a cog in the machine, to use that expression. You help the society to function as a whole, and you take an active role in it. And of course, you help others function within that society as well. And my parents, my dad was 30 years of age, and my mom was 19 when 1920 when she was married. And it was easy, mostly because they met through family. They only were engaged for 3 months, and still they've been together for over 20 years. My own grandmother, she was 17 when she married my grandfather, who was 32 years of age, and they stayed together until he passed away. I really think in terms of the culture that's espoused, if we look at ourselves as not being just one aspect of society, or and see ourselves as the individual, the one who we're primarily thinking about, and rather see ourselves as part of a greater collective, then it does make your role and duty much easier. Because not only are there ways of you getting through it and you fulfilling the roles and obligations you need, but also you make it easier for other people to do the same thing. I mean, this is why here women tend to marry much later in life, as of now at least, whereas in other places in the world, in more communitarian cultures, women marry at a younger age. And of course, I don't think this berefts women of having any position or role in society. I think it does, but at the same time, I think if we focus on the family unit as the cornerstone of society and put far more emphasis on that and make it easier to do it at a young age and make it far more appealing, I think we'd have a much easier environment, at least for Christians, of living that kind of lifestyle. That's my position.
Yeah, I mean, again, because sex is such a natural part of us, and I really find it hard to believe that. I know that there are sects of Christianity out there that speak that demonize sex. I don't understand why they take that position. To me, that's crazy, especially since you came into this world through that function, and plus it's enjoyable. Why would anybody in there? I don't understand it, but unless they have some kind of physical problem with them where they don't enjoy it. But I don't understand why anybody would speak against sex in general. But again, when we're talking about the church, speaking, kind of putting these things in the closet or whatever, the church does not deny that the sexual that the sexual urges that we have as human beings is not a problem, because we do acknowledge that. As a matter of fact, it's mentioned throughout the entire Bible about sexual morality. And so we have within our culture, within our community, the Christian community, programs where we help people who are addicted to pornography and other sexual and anti-biblical sexual activity. I don't see that as a problem. And again, also going back to, being withheld. I forget what somebody said. Something about being held back or something like that. Again, Christians, we struggle with the same thing. We don't say that sex is wrong. We just say within the, it's how it's performed and when it's performed, with whom it's performed. I guess that is the issue.
You have guidelines, right? Like you have guidelines telling you that.
Yeah, this sex.
Even
right.
if you have an issue with it, you still have guidelines to follow. So it's not. I kind of see what you're saying. Like it's not really an issue.
Right. I mean, that's why you have the families like the Duggars, with Duggars, whatever you call it, because they hush. Hold on a second. I'm sorry about that. Go ahead, carry on. This dog will not stop barking.
Eve, you had a question for me and Beckel, although I'm not sure if Beckel will hear it. But would you like to ask now and repeat it if Beckel needs it?
Yeah, I thought Ben brought up a good point earlier, and I hear from a lot of Christians here on the Google Plus community. You guys often refer back to culture. You have to look at the culture of that time. I hear that a lot, and I think that's good. I think that should be looked at. And I'm wondering if you guys think that the church as a whole should consider what Ben mentioned earlier, and that when these things were written in the religious text, the age for marriage was a lot younger. And should the church as a whole consider the current culture and revise things a bit to fit the current culture?
All right.
That opens up a can of worms, doesn't it?
It does, but okay, we can definitely discuss it. In terms of the church changing its policies on sex, you have to realize that the church has come to its decision, not just because they've opened up a book and determined it one fine autumn's day. What happened is it came from quite a bit of time working in sexual ethics, and of course, this dates back to not even in the church itself, but it's adapting a very Stoic and then Aristotelian kind of way of looking at sexual practice. The church, in terms of me asking people to look at the cultural context, I think there's a point in time where the cultural context ceases being important, and that's just arbitrarily when it doesn't fit my church's position. I'm just kidding, but I know someone was probably thinking that. So cultural context might. So in terms of cultural context, it shouldn't dictate whether or not we ought or ought not to do something. I think that should be dictated by moral and ethical reason, concern, and reflection on how anyone wants to take it. But in terms of the culture and getting us to understand it, I think we can definitely discuss culture in terms of maybe the genesis of the idea, but not necessarily whether or not we ought to follow the idea. I think if any religion has an irrational idea when it comes to sex, it should be criticized, it ought to be criticized, and that religion shouldn't exist anymore. The only thing is, I just don't consider my religion's viewpoint on the matter to be irrational.
Well, the reason I brought that up is because if the religion seen it when the age of marriage was a lot younger, they noticed that that was a natural thing for those people. And I'm not advocating for child marriage here. That's totally not what I'm doing here. But if they notice that in times past, and then with all the information that we've been presenting in this hangout, it seems that the church would work around that in some way. Would see that it's and from what I've heard also from you, Epi, is that regarding kind of the morality issue, is that you guys you take the stance that it's based on progression, where you guys learn morality through social interaction and through history. So it just seems that the church would kind of work together with the facts that these kids are at about 14 being sexually active, and do something positive about that instead of trying to restrict it.
Maybe I'm sorry, Maximus. Maybe you can kind of chime in this a little bit more. Is that when we talk about the changing societies, I think that physiology.
Physiological.
Thank you. I love when you try to help me out, but you stutter on it as well.
That was awesome.
I know.
Let me help you.
Let's let two people be stupid now.
Yeah, exactly. Let the record show that I knew the word that I wanted to use. It just that my mouth doesn't know what it's doing sometimes. So our bodies are prepared for sex, by our late teens. Okay, that we have all the the functioning, like hardware, whatever, that's going to allow them to, people to have sex. Now, the thing is that when you take a look at the older times, there was no real teenage years. There was no schooling up until your late teens or anything like that. Once you were old enough to take on your profession that most likely your parents had or whatever, you went into that. That's what you did. And which worked out because it kind of fell in line also with the time that your body had matured to a time that you could, engage in sex. That this was something that you wanted to do. But nowadays we have people that were in school until our late teens. After that, if you want to keep on going, you have university. If you want to go to career there, that like Chris Mott brought up earlier, some people aren't going to be ready to settle down, get married, and have a family until sorry, my bad. Until their late 20s, maybe even 30. Now the thing with the whole sex till marriage thing now at this point in time is that when we're ready, that a woman's chance, for example, of miscarriaging or not being able to get pregnant, decreases every single year. To say that a woman has to now choose between, essentially starting a family young, or waiting to finish her career. Do you think that that's something that should change, or do you think that we should stick by the old biblical standards?
I think nature should ultimately be our guiding point. In terms of women having children or getting married later in life, biology does show that that doesn't necessarily amount to a good thing. In terms of complications with regard to pregnancy, they tend to be more abundant as time goes on. Ideally, marriage, I think, should probably be, and I know this might seem very old-fashioned, but I think I'll just start off with the age that my grandmother was. I think it should be 17 to 25, ideally speaking. I don't think that it should be a law, but rather I do think that, in terms of analyzing and looking at our biology and looking at gender from a natural perspective, and what best functions and what's our best guide, I do think natural law is pretty much what ought to dictate it. Okay. That's my own position. I think that culture should work around natural law, not natural law around culture. I mean, in terms of the aging process, for example, we think that the right time to retire is at age 65. Not because we think that 65-year-olds are automatically inferior to non-65-year-olds. We just think that at a certain point in time, biology is going to dictate your body isn't going to work as well as it once did.
But here, I wanted to go. You were thinking the same thing I was, Doc, is what a lot of the Christians talk about, not following nature, but following Jesus. I mean, wouldn't you think that there's a possibility for it to go actually the other way? Going back to younger marriages, going back to that whole line of thing?
Not in this society, but
that goes back to what you're saying about true Christians. I mean, if they want to get back to the cores and follow the Bible, follow what was set out.
Yeah, that's a debate. I mean, do you want to live as a yuppie? A yuppie couple doesn't want to have kids because, in the past, to have kids, it was great. More help on the farm. Nowadays, kids, you put them through college and everything, they're a financial burden. It's a yuppie lifestyle, and that's what, the druggers in the 19 Kids and Counting, that culture is against the yuppie lifestyle.
Nicole, did you want to respond to that at all? Because I know you're trying to jump in there for a second, and then after that, I want Kiwis to weigh in.
Now go ahead. I lost my train of thought. So
okay, sorry. If you remember what it is, just let me know now.
I have a quick question for Epi.
Okay, sure.
So, so Max, I was curious to know, because you keep talking about, nature or culture following natural law and this, that, and the other, but, I mean, if we follow that, I mean, nature is what science studies, social sciences, and there are different schools of thought about that, but, included in that. And, like, so how does the idea that naturally there are theories being proposed that several marriages throughout a lifestyle seem natural, like one in which you find somebody to bear children with, one in which somebody you share your career with, and somebody with which you retire with. I mean, there are these theories that exists, and it's a natural phenomenon. Mm-hmm. How do you balance that with your idea of using natural phenomenon and your religion?
Oh, okay. So from what I understand it, the social sciences are concerned with telling us about human society and, to a point, human nature. Psychology deals more with human nature, whereas sociology and anthropology deal more with human culture and society. So
don't tell me what to do, Max.
From what I understand, if I'm wrong, please correct me.
I'm totally kidding.
Okay. So with keeping that in mind, while I do think that sociologists do have a terrific role in describing all these things, and so do psychologists and anthropologists, I ultimately think in terms of what ethics revolves around isn't necessarily how cultures work or descriptive facts about psychology, human psychology that is, but rather what is the end or the purpose of sexual functions, of human functions, The end, or the telos as it's usually known as in the Greek, concerns itself with these kinds of things. Aristotle said ethics is mostly about what is man's highest good or highest purpose. And I think that purposes aren't something that are extrinsic. Like, for example, purpose isn't something that's a social construct. I don't think we construct human purpose. I think that human purpose and natural purposes are intrinsic to the thing. This is why when we look at a tree, one is wilted.
So is procreating intrinsic?
Is procreating intrinsic? The end, it's intrinsic to the genitalia. Like, that's why we have them. Like, it answers the question of why. Why do humans have genitalia? Well, it serves the end of procreation.
It serves the start of it, I think.
Keefies, you've been kind of waiting outside for a while, and it took a while to get you in here, but
That's okay. I wasn't aware of the whole panel.
yeah, no, it's generally panel. We generally kind of open it up to the end for people, but on the topic matter at hand, I'll give you a couple minutes here. Do you want to weigh in on your thoughts of the topic we're discussing?
Yep, I actually kind of like it. I knew it was going to come up someday. Well, your boy Keefe's been saying that sex is one of those things that's a hot button issue right now because of how creepy yet awesome it can be at the same time. The reason I think y'all be saying to be doing all this bang bang stuff outside getting hitched with your shotty is because of how intimate it feels. Think about it. Y'all say to follow nature in that, right? Naturally, the whole idea of sex is to reproduce an operation population. When believers be saying it's only for marriage, only to reproduce, they're following what nature wants in a way, right? Because it feels like that. The reason why it feels so right to do it only like that and just to reproduce in that is because that's the original purpose, even going back to an evolutionary standpoint, right?
Right.
I would agree with that, but at the same time, I don't think that it's needed the way that it was in a primitive time. I mean, we're in a time period where humanity is flourished, and there's tons of us. There's not a need for us to keep the human race going by every single person having children. And so I think, and especially with the way that our society operates, there are a lot of people that do not want to have children, and it's just like Floyd said. Children are costly, and a lot of people will get married to other people, and they decide not to ever bear children.
I get it. I'm just saying that might be more of a social, like, society construct than, how nature kind of intended it. Because you're saying, that's the Christians are just saying this because that's what they believe and all that, right?
Wait
but
a minute,
it's not
though.
necessarily just a belief thing.
I think that nature, no, I agree with you on that aspect, but I think that nature intended it to, for survival purposes, and we don't really, like I was saying, we don't really need that to the extreme at this point. And we also, it may even be problematic, and to me, it would be problematic if every single person ended up bearing children and kept childbearing without considering the possibility of overpopulation and how much humanity damages.
And that's why the New World Order is so important.
I never understood how in what way could the world be overpopulated? I don't understand.
Not too many babies.
Resources, the Malthusian.
All the stuff.
The Malthusian dilemma.
Well, hold on.
It's hard to hear anybody. It's hard to hear anybody. One at a time, please.
Problematic with every single person.
It's kind of going to veer into a kind of off topic if we kind of go that route. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Yeah, because I never understood that for the life of me when people say that. So maybe one of these days.
Well, a different hangout.
Are you familiar with like the Malthusian dilemma?
No.
Malthus, he had the idea that populations increase exponentially, or geometrically, whereas agriculture only increases additively, or something to that effect, such that eventually, if we just keep procreating to the nth degree, we will have more people than the planet can provide food for.
That's why NASA needs to get on making that colony spaceship so we can get to another planet and get their resources.
Eskimos seem to be doing just fine.
I would also just like to point out something. There are actually first world countries that are currently having the problem with underpopulation, most specifically Italy as being one example, as well as Japan. These are
Japan, really?
Yep, Japan. One of the biggest problems is women are women are entering. I really hate saying this, but one of the biggest problems in Japan right now is that women are entering the workforce, and of course, traditional elements of having families is being put off. And of course, this isn't an easy topic of, well, let's let the women folks stop working. We can't
Barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah, exactly.
Why would you hate saying that?
Underpopulation is different than overpopulation, though. Like the reasoning's different.
America.
It doesn't take like 10 families to raise enough food for the overpopulation. Like it only takes a few. So underpopulation problems are.
Well, I could see overpopulation a problem in one area, but I mean, if you have people spread out throughout the world, I mean, look at the Eskimos; they're doing just fine. So I mean, if you get people out there,
anyway,
they're doing fine, except that they live in the bloody North Pole.
Come on.
Everything is imported too.
The proper term
is cattle in the ice and the snow. Like it's.
Also, the proper term is Inuit. Eskimo is considered kind of Eskimo isn't really considered a polite way of saying it. Inuit is the proper way.
I would just wanted to kind of throw a disclaimer out there. I am not advocating that that there's an overpopulation problem. I'm just merely saying that that is a possibility, and why I threw that out there.
Oh, okay.
That's fair enough.
That makes sense.
Although, in terms of space, I heard that everyone in the world could technically fit in the borders of Texas. It wouldn't be pleasant. It would be terrible, and we'd all probably suffocate. But
it's not about us fitting on the Earth. It's about.
I know. It's not about.
I think it's more about resources than actual like space.
Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, before we start to completely going off the rails here, I think that. We've kind of reached the end of the time that we generally allot for these discussions. I want to thank every single person for coming out.
You're welcome.
Here. I'm going to give last words, everybody, if anybody wants to add in anything before we leave. B, I'll let you go last because it was your topic there. So let's start with Eve. You have anything you want to say?
Yes, sorry, I have my mic muted. Well, I just wanted to say in regards, I appreciate you having me here. This is the first time that I've been on Deeper Than Dogma, and I really enjoyed it. I think you're a great host, especially considering that there's strong personalities present tonight, myself included. But I just wanted to say that regarding religion affecting sexual oppression, I do think it can. I'm not going to say it does because that kind of generalizes, but I do think that it can, and depending on the type of influence that someone has growing up in church and with their family and what their specific religion teaches, it can very much make them feel shame, guilt, and so forth. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and thank you for having me.
All right, no problem. Floyd.
I think historically, Christian views on sex have been influenced by scientific and secular views on it, like such as just accepting that we're sexual beings but we need to deal with our sexuality in a responsible manner and so forth, instead of just saying, oh, it's dirty and impure and stuff like that. So, but I agree with Veckel that the Bible really never really teaches that sex is wrong outside of marriage. I'm sorry, that sex is wrong within marriage. That it's more wrong just simply outside of marriage. Although marriage has meant different things throughout the ages as well.
Okay, Mr. Mowdy. I got it right that time.
I think that people are playing jokes on me by purposely mispronouncing my last name. Anywho, I think that I don't know. I think that religion can extrinsically and intrinsically place structures that can affect sexual behavior, and I think that it's a topic that we probably only touched the tip of the iceberg of. That was not a penis joke. And yeah, thank you. That's it. I think this is an awesome topic. That's all I have to say. Bye.
All right. Keefies kind of came in late there, but do you want to add anything before we go off air?
Yeah. Well, you've heard it all the time. I mean, sex is always going to be a hard subject, right? People saying what and who you can do. Young homies undergrad just got to learn for themselves. The way I see it, it's only dirty because our society wants to make it so for some reason. Depends on your beliefs. If you're raised like I was, Mom always used to say, you better not be banging for marriage. But if you're raised like more on the secular side, then it all depends, like how you were raised and how you feel, because everybody seems to have their own little way of looking at it. And I think discussions like these are just never going to go away because, again, sex is one of those things that is so ingrained into nature and is so, I guess, mystical in a way that everyone's going to see it different. And I think that's why it's such a hot button issue, because just naturally it produces another entity. So, without getting into woo here, that's probably why everyone makes such a big deal about it.
Okay. Max.
Okay. I just want to say I wish Keefies was in this discussion earlier because he has such an awesome way of discussing matters. I just love your terminology. It's hilarious.
Thanks, bro.
No problem, homie. Okay, so yeah, I had an interesting discussion. It was nice going over biblical ethics ideas. I think everyone here agrees, which is odd enough because everyone has such a strong, distinct personality that abstinence programs just do not work. And yeah, it was quite fun. Also, Eve, it was nice hearing your voice again. And yeah, with that, I'll just end what I have to say.
All right, Veckel.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to come here. I think this is my first time coming to Deeper Dogma program, so it's pretty interesting. Again, the Christian worldview is about sex, at least according to what Scripture says. That sex is completely natural. There's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. The only disagreement that Christians and non-believers have is how it's been performed, when it's performed, and who it's performed with, I guess. And that seems to be the only difference. But I mean, other than that, I'm definitely an advocate of it. I enjoy it as well. We came here through that function, so I'm definitely not going to speak against it in any way, shape, or form, except for all that the Bible speaks against. But other than that, I think we had a pretty good conversation. It was pretty good, and I'll stop there.
All right, Xbox, any last words?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I'm hoping maybe next time we can get more on the psychology of sex and religion as well, on failings, ego, conquest, things like that. And I enjoyed it.
I actually took a psychology class, so I might be able to help with that.
B, thank you very much for suggesting this topic and coming in tonight. Do you have any closing remarks for the show?
Sure, yeah. Thanks for letting me come on and such short notice. I really enjoyed it, and hopefully I can join the panel on some other topics. But I just wanted to say that I guess my bottom line for this discussion is that it's obviously, I guess we did all kind of agree that the abstinence-only programs don't work, which I'm glad that that's kind of an agreement. I guess my point is that when you have something like sex, the fact that almost every human being has a sex drive at some point in their life, to me, there's a reason that it's focused on within religion is because everybody has some kind of sexual sex drive, and so if the church can hook in, or if religion, or they can hook into that and make that part of the guilt cycle or whatever, it's ultimately a way to control, is kind of what I'm trying to say. So that's kind of, that could be something we would touch on another point, but that was the last point that I wanted to make that I didn't get to make earlier. So, but thanks for having me, and hopefully we can have another discussion another time.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming out. Thanks for everybody that was watching this. I want to kind of echo Veckel's sentiments. Yeah, sex is great. It's natural. I don't think we, should demonize it or kind of frown away from it. And he's right. Yeah, we all came into this world through sex, and if I'm lucky and time it right, I will hopefully leave the world while having it. So thank you very much, and have yourselves a good night.